Il n'est pas donné à chacun de prendre un bain
It's not everyone who can take a bath in a crowd. To enjoy crowds is an art, wrote Charles Baudelaire, the master of lyric poetry, in his 1869 collection of short prose poems, La Spleen de Paris. Baudelaire, writing during the French Second Empire, didn't see himself as a part of his broader society. He saw himself, the poet, as an outsider, an observer, a surgeon, diagnosing and excising the social malaise that he believed to be a sign of his times. Ennui, a feeling of listlessness, apathy, weariness, and dissatisfaction that permeates deep into your being.
Ils doivent rire, quelquefois, de ceux qui les plaignent pour leur fortune si agitée et pour leur vie si chaste.
Walter Benjamin, over half a century after the publication of The Spleen, became irredeemably obsessed with Baudelaire. Wishing to become the next great translator of the French master, he devoured Baudelaire's works, and within a larger project on the Paris of the Second Empire, wrote a seminal essay of critical theory titled On Some Motifs in Baudelaire. In it, Benjamin builds on Baudelaire, observing the crowds and the individuals of mid-century Paris through the eyes of the poet. He arrives at a diagnosis. In modernity, he argues, the basic experience of most individuals is non-experience itself. This stems from the shift into modern capitalism, which has involved not only a fundamental change in the methods and organization of production, but also a reorganization of the concept of value qua value. In pre-modern societies, value was derived from use. The use value of an object was its measuring bar. Use value, for Marx, originates in the physical, palpable existence of the commodity. The use value of a banana, for instance, is the product of the physicality of the banana, its capability of being consumed, and the nutrition that its consumption will provide. To establish capitalism as the governing economic system of the world, capital needed to change society's understanding of value. It needed to create, then embed and normalize exchange value. This is no longer value based on the use of the object, but rather on the labor time that was required for its creation. The banana is no longer valued for its nutrition or its consumption, but only in comparison with other goods. The banana is now worth 1/10 of a loaf of bread, because it takes 1/10 of the labor time to produce the loaf. Capital, in its rise to the top, then extended exchange value far beyond the previously delimited market. Benjamin explains that modernity, spurred by the rise of capitalism, is the first time in human history that the governing economic system runs itself exclusively conceptually. Capitalism, Benjamin argues, operates with an unparalleled level of abstraction. It runs itself as conceptually as possible, reducing all value to an objective calculation, exchange value. But Benjamin, like other Marxists, also believes that capitalism doesn't only commodify objects of production. Instead, capitalism also reifies, literally meaning thingifies, social phenomena, turning them into commodities. People, along with their relationships, are reduced by capitalism to passive objects, defined by their exchange value rather than their subjectivity. Although they were once individuals, capitalists turned them into passive, obscured, objective commodities. Now they are exchange value, and exchange value only. Benjamin analyzes Baudelaire through this lens, arguing that the French poet understood this reification of people. He says that Baudelaire saw the crowd as humanity's experience of themselves as the commodity, rather than experiencing experience itself, which would be in excess of determined ideas. Humanity only experiences objectivity and determination. Modern humanity's experience is determined by exchange value. With this determination of experience, the modern subject is incapable of thinking critically, of being reflective. In determinate experience, the subject becomes addicted to non-complexity. The modern subject knows that the rules, values, and outcomes of society are beyond their individual control and resigns their subjectivity to the objectifying powers of exchange value. And with this resignation, the subject also surrenders their critical, reflective thought. The subject, subsumed under established concepts, becomes incapable of expressing their subjectivity and forfeits their conceptual powers to determined, unreflective thought. Instead, they embrace apathy, ennui, non-feeling, and non-experience. Baudelaire wrote about the poet as the figure able to break from the control of exchange value.
Le poète jouit de cette
The poet enjoys an incomparable privilege. In his own way, he's able to be himself
qu'il peut
and someone else.
être lui-même et autrui.
For Baudelaire, the poet's privilege lies in their ability to maintain subjective experience, acting as an individual capable of critical thought, and therefore distinct from the mass.
He enters anyone's personality whenever he wants to. For him alone, all is vacant, and if certain places seem closed, it's because in his eyes they aren't worth the trouble to visit. Baudelaire further writes, driving home the image of the modern poet who stands opposed to the mass experience of ennui. Benjamin reacts to Baudelaire's depictions of the poet and describes the figure of the poet himself, saying that the poet does not participate in the game. He stands in his corner, no happier than those who are playing. He too has been cheated out of his experience, a modern man. The only difference is that he rejects the narcotics with which the gamblers seek to submerge the consciousness that has delivered them to the march of the second hand. Walter Benjamin, a German Jew, wrote on some motifs in Baudelaire in 1939. His preoccupation with the ennuied crowds was more than academic. It was pragmatic. Benjamin, like Baudelaire, saw his contemporary society fall into determined, non-critical thought, into non-experience, and into ennui. Faced with a dearth of experience, the crowd Benjamin observed sought an alternative narcotic with which to submerge their consciousness. Dulled and undetermined by the subsumption of all thought under established concepts, the 1930s German crowd was made to feel irrelevant, unimportant, powerless, and incapable of thinking critically. They, like the crowds that Baudelaire concerned himself with, were addicted to non-complexity. Their experience of non-experience led them to apathy, to ennui, an ennui that worried Benjamin, especially as it regards the rise of fascism. It's essential to be precise and meticulous here. Benjamin does not argue that ennui necessarily causes fascism. There can and has been ennui without fascism. Instead, Benjamin understands that the lack of critical thinking and the addiction to non-complexity that is involved in ennui accompanies and can help the rise of fascism. The masses, being addicted to non-complexity, freed from critical thought, and subject to non-experience, fall prey to the discourse of the fascist, a discourse based on anti-subjective universality, the extermination of subjectivity, and, in the case of the Nazis that Benjamin observed, the forced institution of Aryanness as a supposed universal value. The fascist populist can exploit modernity and convince the masses that only through embracing the rise of the far right will they begin to experience again. Only through the totalitarian state, the fascist argues, will the masses be liberated and allowed to have reflective thought once more. The fascist appeal to a return to a mythical better time, whether it be the Roman Empire for Mussolini, the Catholic Empire for Franco, or Aryan supremacy for Hitler, serves as a stand-in for the restoration of individual experience and subjectivity that both Baudelaire and Benjamin saw as lost in modern society.
Benjamin's concern about ennui was a concern about the rise of fascism.
Walter Benjamin killed himself in Portbou, Catalonia, in September 1940, after the Spanish fascist police threatened to deport him back to Nazi-occupied France. It might be vapid to insist on the fact that the 21st century economy is an economy of attention. Constantly, we are bombarded with micro and macro stimuli that overrun our cognitive capabilities and demand our interaction and attentiveness. Attention and information form a negative relationship, The latter consumes the former. As one rises, the other must fall. The advent of digital media has wholly changed humanity's interaction with information. Information was once scarce and localized. You would have to find it physically, to search through bookshelves at a library, to page through textbooks, to hold the information in your hands and feel its weight. Information is now decentralized, expansive, and commonplace. It is everywhere. Always. Its value, however, has not decreased. This increased supply of information has been perfectly matched by an increased demand on attention. We have fed and continue feeding our attention spans to the growing, bulbous monster of information. In an information-rich world, the wealth of information means a dearth of something else, a scarcity of whatever it is that information consumes. What information consumes is rather obvious. It consumes the attention of its recipients. Hence, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention, wrote Herbert Simon as early as 1971. Attention then becomes, therefore, a symbolic currency. You pay attention in contemporaneity. You literally use it as a depletable stock for access to goods, namely to social goods, to social media, to social information. You pay attention for standing.
The individual is then forced to use more of her attention to be in the know, and the freedom of choice offered by modern societies becomes constrained again by the need to attract attention, writes Maxi Hatemeyer in The Second Wave of Attention Economics.
However, unlike modern currencies, attention is inherently limited. It cannot be saved for later, and it is foregone if not spent wisely. This leads altogether to overstimulation and to a misuse of our cognitive resources. To quote Mark Fisher in The Slow Cancellation of the Future, the condition of contemporaneity, the fundamental quality of the 21st century, is that no one is bored. Everything is boring. Our attention is increasingly perpetually occupied, but our cognition remains unstimulated. We are psychically bloated. Our attention has been carved out of us, ripped from us, and claimed in the name of exterior forces. No space is left in our minds for thought.
We are becoming, by our own accord, machines that do little other than interact superficially with content, refusing to engage critically with it, not out of a desire to stop reflecting, but rather due to an impossibility. Due to the impossible reconciliation of the constant stimulation of our attentive mechanism and the existence of a fully functioning reflective mechanism.
We have conditioned ourselves through a decade of scrolling and liking, through constant mini dopamine boosts, to struggle with reflection as long as our attention is always stimulated. We have crowded out critical thought with vapid interaction. The narcotic that Walter Benjamin pitted in opposition to the poet has become normalized, embedded in the economy of the 21st century, ingrained directly into the relations that we construct with our peers. Our social life, our work life, our free time all live in the shadow of algorithms that clamor for our attention, freezing our capacity for reflection. We have allowed ourselves, once again, to drift into an addiction to non-complexity, into the anesthesiation of our critical abilities. We are becoming the lethargic crowd. We are accepting ennui back into our lives. It would be easy, far too easy, to blame the degradation of our critical capacities only on social media, short-form content, and the big tech firms abusing our shortening attention spans. This is a tempting argument. It removes all culpability from the victims and places it squarely on the far-off elites that most stand to gain from the destruction of our critical thought. Yet this fails to address the single most dangerous technological threat to reflection: the advent and development of artificial intelligence.
We are already accepting and normalizing the use of artificial intelligence as a crutch for our powers of reflection and critical thought.
As Benjamin diagnosed, we are creatures addicted to non-complexity. When we see an easy way out, we are tempted to take it, to choose the path of least resistance, to minimize our time and struggle. This, today, in the times of ChatGPT, is surfacing in the form of a remarkable abuse of artificial intelligence.
Here's another obvious statement. AI is being used more than ever, and its usage just keeps skyrocketing. It's become, for many, a necessary daily tool. But our increasing reliance on artificial intelligence does not enhance our own cognitive abilities. It replaces them. AI is the unrivaled champion of cognitive offloading. It's the ultimate agent to which we delegate cognitive tasks, reducing engagement in deep, reflective thinking.
The use of artificial intelligence for tasks as simple and presumably harmless as brainstorming ideas or basic problem solving represents a significant concession of our intellectual capabilities, of our abilities of comprehension, of cognition, of reflection, and of thought, to a mechanical, non-subject other. Surrendering your critical thought processes to artificial intelligence not only undermines your ability to truly learn from the specific task you are avoiding engagement with, but it also simultaneously erodes the strength of your cognitive skills overall, impacting your ability to think and reason in the future. You need not trust abstract humanistic reasoning on this point. Natalia Kazmina found weaker neural connectivity and under-engagement of neural networks in an experimental group that received help from large language models for writing an essay, where the LLM group's participants performed worse than their counterparts at all levels. Michael Gerlich, in a similar study, came to the same conclusion, finding that higher AI tool usage is associated with reduced critical thinking abilities. By using artificial intelligence as a generative crutch, as a brace for thought, as a tool to structure, build, and replace critical thinking, you destroy your own capacity for reflection. In sacrificing meaningful growth for superficial speed, you damn yourself to a vicious cycle of intellectual retrogression. Artificial intelligence, as a social phenomenon, condemns society to mass regression, to the reinstitution of mass ennui, driven by a piecemeal destruction of the subject's capabilities of reflection. A destruction that the subject themselves sought out, blinded by the white light of progress, speed, and mechanical advancement, forgetting the essence of what made them a subject in the first place, their ability to think for themselves. Balled up into an objectified humanity, driven and controlled by the algorithmic answers of a non-reflective, objective machine that has conquered the present and the future of intellect, we are bound to repeat the mistakes that Benjamin and Baudelaire presaged.
Incapable of thinking for ourselves, modern man, dependent on a new, supposedly intelligent narcotic, is bound to become entranced by populism once again, to fall victim to the logical consequence of his self-inflicted intellectual debasement, and to become a member of the crowd that accepts totalitarianism with open arms and thunderous applause.
As Baudelaire and Benjamin warned, we cannot afford to relinquish our capacity for reflection. The question now becomes, how? How can we resist the seduction of non-complexity? How can we deviate from this trend of non-reflective thought? Theodor Adorno, Benjamin, and others of the Frankfurt School would prescribe engagement with art to their contemporaries. They wished that those whose experience was non-experience would engage with artwork, specifically with lyric poetry, so that they could feel their subjectivity spark to life, so they could awaken their subjectivity once again. Today, we are too sick for that medicine. Benjamin's cure might have worked nearly a century ago, when the death of critical thought was externally imposed. But we have fallen far too deep into the rabbit hole. We have consciously imposed this new wave of determined thought on ourselves. Reading a poem or engaging with artwork cannot save us now, not on its own. Engagement with art will help, but only if it's paired with a wholehearted, genuine embrace of complexity and a desire to reflect. We must not only engage with art and engage more meaningfully with it, but concomitantly allow boredom, difficulty, and reflection to penetrate our lives once again. We must force ourselves to do the difficult things, to make the hard choices, and to be bored.
There's only one thing to do. The only solution we can possibly entertain involves fighting against our submission to artificial intelligence. If we sincerely want to break free of ennui's chains, we must protect our ability to engage in critical thought. we must defend our agency, defend our subjectivity, and remain unapologetically, unwaveringly, and deeply human.